overrun is one of the worst things which can happen to any commercial airliner, cargo airliner, or even business airliner. Although these things are likely to be common, it is one of the first worst disasters in aviation history. No matter how much the airline industries try to train their pilots to avoid these disasters, pilots can't avoid them. Let's take a look at one of the examples. This happened on November 6, 2015. In this footage, a Batik Airlines Boeing 737-900ER touched down the runway very late, overrun, and the nose gear collapsed after it rested at the ground 100 meters from the runway at Yogyakarta International Airport. Luckily, no one was injured in this overrun, but it was very deadly. But on August 27, 2006, making the worst overrun incident happen in history. This is the entire story of Comair Flight 5191, 15 years later. Disclaimer: this video has some disturbing images, footage, and audio. Please watch the video carefully because viewer discretion is advised. On August 27, 2006, one of the busiest days in Bluegrass International Airport, Lexington, Kentucky, near the US-Canadian border. Back then, just around months ago, Kentucky recently got free days for people who need to spend some free time and be off from work. But then in July 2006, they were on their duties again. Bluegrass International Airport staff, including flight agents and ATCs, worked morning, noon, afternoon, evening, midnight, and finally, just around 5:30 a.m. of their local time, there was a plane ready to depart before they could have a break for 2 hours. It was a plane going from Bluegrass International Airport, Lexington, Kentucky, US-Canadian border to Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. The plane in questioning was Comair Delta Connection Airlines Flight 5191, Bombardier CRJ-100ER, registered as N431CA. The plane was manufactured in January 30, 2001. Comair recently have been with Delta Airlines for a while, and since this plane is Canadian, the plane will be sent back to any airport in Canada to the aircraft shed, or they call it as hangars, for maintenance just in case. There were 47 passengers and 3 crew members on board, which included 2 pilots and 1 flight attendant. The passengers on this flight were 42 out of 47 were American, 3 out of 47 were Canadian, and 2 out of 47 were Japanese. The cockpit crew of this flight is 39-year-old Captain Jeffrey Clay, who has 4,710 flight hours of his experience, including 3,082 flight hours on a CRJ-100, and a 44-year-old First Officer James Polanski, who is a resigned captain from Gulfstream International, who started working on Comair for a while, and he has 6,564 flight hours on experience, which included 940 hours as a resigned captain and 3,564 flight hours in the CRJ-100. The pilots waited for a message from the Automatic Terminal Information Service. The ATIS finally sent it a message a minute later to talk to them. The crew was all set. The passengers were on board. First Officer James then requested the tower.
Good morning, Comair 191 is going Atlanta with Alpha.
Comair 191, Lexington clearance cleared to Atlanta Airport via Bowling Green, Berlin 2 arrival, maintain 6,000. Expect flight level 27010 minutes after departure. Departure is 120.75, squawk 6641.
Okay, you got Bowling Green, missed the other part, 6,020.75, 6641.
Comair 191, it's Berlin 2, Echo Romeo, Lima, India, November 2 arrival.
Berlin 2, appreciate it, Comair 191.
At 5:52, the pilots were discussing who should control the plane for taxi and half of full throttle during takeoff. After a minute discussion, the pilots decide that First Officer James will take advantage of the pushback, taxi, and half throttle to take off. First Officer James accepts that he will do all of that. Then they also decide that he will land the plane at Atlanta after the plane is being handled by the captain. Few minutes after getting ready, the flight crew begins the taxi and takeoff briefings. While briefing, the reference is made to runway 22 as being the takeoff runway planned for this flight. Also, the pilot's heading bugs should be set to 227 degrees, which corresponds to the magnetic heading for runway 22. At about 5:59, the captain states that the airplane is ready to push back from the gate.
Ground camera 191, just give you a heads up on a push.
Comair 191, advisor to taxi.
Roger.
After asking permission to the tower, the aircraft was ready to push back at 6 a.m. with the left and right engines on.
Second and started Indiana's Roswell too low.
Got 689 for this question.
My dog checked APR's on, def message at runway 22 at Lexington up to 6. Press reversers are on, no press manual, ignition is on, 3000, cross the board.
After that, the first officer wanted to go to a washroom break, so he informed the captain that he needs to go to the laboratory room.
Got one.
Two minutes after the pushback, TATC instructs the flight crew to taxi the CRJ-100 to runway 22. After a quick washroom break, First Officer James came back to the cockpit. The captain notified him that the ATC instructed them, so First Officer James contacted the tower.
Comair 191 is ready to taxi, we have Alpha.
Comair 191, taxi runway 22, altimeter 3000, and the winds are 2008.
The ATC instructs them to authorize the plane to cross runway 26. one of the intersecting runways and challenging. They cannot stop aborting takeoff when they are max powered. The plane needs to taxi to Airline 2 where runway 26 is there. Then the plane needs to cross runway 26 until it will reach runway 22. While First Officer James acknowledges the instruction, the captain starts to taxi the CRJ-100 shortly afterward.
3000 taxi 22 Comair 181.
After that, from about 6:03 AM to about 6:04 AM, while the jet was continuing taxiing, the flight crew engages in a conversation that is not pertinent to the safe operation of the flight. By the time First Officer James begins the before takeoff checklist, he indicates again that the flight would be departing from runway 22. After that, Captain Clay stops the plane at the short line to hold runway 26. First Officer James announces the public address system to welcome the passengers in this flight and completes before takeoff checklist.
That's complete, camp receive CAS. Check tank cleared. Oh yeah. I'm looking at it because, like, okay, I see 7, but it's, yeah, there's a green extra one there. Camp receive CAS, check cleared. Who's the flight takeoff checks flight? Oh, ready? All set.
At 6:05, while the plane was at runway 26's hold short line, First Officer James tells the ATC that they are gonna depart and are ready to go.
Trail Leisure, Comair 121, ready to go.
Comair 191, Lexington, tail fly, runway heading clear takeoff.
Runway heading clear takeoff 191.
But the first officer and tower did not notice the runaway numbers. This was one of the horrible mistakes the tower and the first officer made. At this point, the captain just started to line up runway 26. Then he called for the lineup checklist.
And line check.
Eagle Flight 882, that heading work for you? Do you want to go northwest around to see weather that's ahead of you? No, that looks fantastic. Thank you very much. What is that again, please? I'm just heading for that bad boy. Eagle Flight 882, contact 87-126.37 today. 28.6.
Transponders on, packs on, please close. Clear for takeoff, runway heading.
Just at the time of 6:06, the captain then turns the control, then gives it access to the first officer to conduct the takeoff.
All yours, Cheel.
After upsetting the access, First Officer James sets the thrust. Then the plane starts accelerating. During the plane rolling to take off, First Officer James comments that it's weird when the runaway has no lights on.
And it's weird with no lights.
Yeah. Check.
But then the pilots realized that they were reacting the end of the runaway.
You want to rotate? Whoa! Fuck.
And it happened.
Fuck! Oh!
Comair Flight 5191 crashed in a forest near the neighborhood, very far from the runway. The impact was so loud that even the plane hit the puppy lights. Landing gear collapsed, then skidding off from the ground until it came to a rest 300 meters from the runway. What the ATC saw was unbelievable. A regional jet just crashed somewhere far away from the airport. Because of this, the ATC called 911 and a ground crew to rescue the souls on that crippling plane. Firefighters rushed to the scene and watered the fire. It took 3 hours to kill the entire blaze. After that, they searched for bodies. Amazingly, there was only one sole survivor in this crash, which was First Officer James Pohinke. Since he was basically under the flight controls, James Pohinke survived this crash. He had several injuries with multiple broken bones, a collapsed lung, and severe bleeding. The police officers, which they arrived shortly, pulled him out from the destroyed cockpit. But the other crew and the passengers couldn't make it. A total of 49 out of 50 occupants have perished from the fire. This was one of the worst accidents that happened in history for a regional jet, and the second worst in Comair after the incident of Comair Flight 3272. Then witnesses started to have some questions. How would a plane could skid off the runway? Was it pilot error? Wrong runway? Instruments issues? Speed slowing down? What was it? And most importantly, why so many people have to die? After the crash, the NTSB, or the National Transportation Safety Board, started the investigation, but they wanted more than that. They fully wanted to investigate with the survivor. After James Pohinke was recovered, the NTSB requested him to come to the headquarters for the investigation. He started to get an interview on how he made this crash by an accident. James Pohinke tried to be honest by saying that the plane was running perfectly fine at the runway, but while the plane was still running, he and Captain Clay felt that there were no runway lights. Well, this was something. The investigators got a clue, but still, they needed more information. So, they requested the ATC to come for an interview. What the ATC told them made them priceless.
The ATC worker told them that the plane was supposed to cross Runaway 26 to 22 because that taxiway where planes should taxi to Runaway 22 was closed due to maintenance. It made them more clear, but the ATC worker was not done. He told them that the first officer was talking more than focusing on the performance and the taxiing work. The ATC worker also realized that he made a mistake of himself. He didn't notice them accelerating runway 26, and he didn't notice the runway numbers too. This was the clue they wanted to know.
Finally, on July 26, 2007, they sent their final report. The first officer was too engaged by talking to the ATC rather than focusing on the plane's performance and taxiing work. He and Captain Clay weren't on the right runway, and the ATC worker was also half of the fault. He shouldn't have cleared them to enter the runway and see the runway numbers. That's how the investigation was finished. In the end, the first officer was charged with multiple negligence for causing this horrible accident with a huge mistake. He was not found guilty, as the victims' families forgave him for his wrongdoings, but he was charged though. The ATC worker didn't found guilty and was not charged, but he got a warning from the NTSB. Nowadays, First Officer James Polinky is no longer working in Comair. He's now taking care of himself with his injuries since he lost a leg. The plane was a complete total loss and destroyed. It was damaged beyond repair and scrapped. Those scraps were later used for the other CRJs. The NTSB and FAA, or Federal Aviation Administration, have informed all airport guidelines and the airline industries that they should train their staff and always double check if there is something wrong. Also, they recommended all airports add check marks of runway numbers so that the pilots could see the runway if they are at the right runway or not. Most ATCs should be responsible for this too. 15 years have passed since this incident, and Comair is no longer in service in the US. Instead, the airline went back in December 2020, but only in South Africa and their partner British Airways. Since then, all the CRJ-100s are given to Delta Airlines since they mostly need the CRJs. And the passengers and crew who died in this crash, a memorial stone at Lexington Opera House, commissioned by the University of Kentucky Arboretum, and later moved to their site. But there were more accidents like this before. A good example will probably be Western Airlines Flight 2605, where a DC-10 landed on the wrong runway in maintenance, causing the plane to hit a dump truck, then back into the taxiway, hitting a warehouse. It was very deadly in Mexico City. Thanks to the new regulations and guidelines by the FAA and NTSB, we hope that this accident never happens again.